I'm so excited. We have a great treat for you today. We have not one, but two people, a couple, Jason and Haley Bilotti. They have a book, and we're going to talk about their book. We're going to talk about what it means to be called by God, and especially in today's time. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about adoption and family, and we're going to talk about what the times that we're in and what that means for what God is calling us to do, perhaps different. So, Jason and Haley, welcome. I'm so glad to have you both.
And we're honored to be here.
Thank you.
So, let's start with a little bit about leadership because you're coming from Atlanta. You're in a big church. You've got a lot of great influences. But Chick-fil-A is a favorite of many believers. And you've had a chance to really raise up leaders, not only just raise up leaders, but people that have their own restaurant. So what have you come to learn from that process? And then what do you in turn teach others from your experience?
Sure. Yeah. We Haley and I started with Chick-fil-A when we were teenagers, and we met working together, and we've been married. It'll be 30 years here in March. And so we were blessed enough to get a restaurant back in June of 95 in Atlanta, and then got a second one 12 years after that. And so Beth, exactly what you're referring to. God put me within Chick-fil-A. I feel like my calling within Chick-fil-A is to develop young men and women who want to be operators or possibly work on Chick-fil-A staff. And so we've had 31 leaders become operators of their own restaurant. And, you know, I'm a big John Maxwell fan, and I love to look at the leadership principles he puts out there, which is, you know, the main one is everything rises and falls on leadership. And, you know, even though I read a lot of his books, I don't think there's any better leader that we've ever looked to than Jesus Christ, and how he led with humility and character, and just taught us how to lead by example.
Well, and so Haley, what have you seen from this process? Because not everybody turns into a great leader. What are the traits that y'all look for when you're hiring people for your restaurants? And what is it that you really have seen where you've been able to help others? Because, you know, someone may not come in as a great leader, but that doesn't mean they can't become one. So what traits do y'all really look for and then really fine tune in others?
Well, Beth, I have to just be honest. I am no longer working in the restaurant. I joined Jason and helped when he was first on the road for the first 5 years that our restaurant was open. And then I was blessed enough to get pregnant with our first son. And my dream was to be a stay-at-home mom. So I am no longer in the area of hiring our employees anymore. So I'll let Jason answer that one. So it's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think anytime we're talking about employees, but then in general, looking for leaders, you know, several things come to mind is, do they have a strong work ethic? And are they able to develop relationships? And the thing we talk about is work hard and build relationships. And it's the "and" that's the most important word in there, because we have a lot of people that might come in and work hard and people don't enjoy working with them, or they come in, they're lazy, but they get along with everybody. And so it's the combination of the two, because once you are able to work hard, build relationships with others, then eventually when you go to lead, you've got people that want to follow that. And so we really talk about the simplicity of that, but it seems like it's becoming harder and harder for people to pull off both these days.
Well, and I think one of the things is you're so attached to a very familiar brand. I mean, people expect to go through a Chick-fil-A drive-through, and I mean, it's like whoop whoop whoop. It took 10 minutes. I mean, what's up with that, right?
Yeah.
So you're associated with a brand, but let's talk about that, because you train people to become an extension of that brand. And how do you work with young people? And Haley, as a parent, and I know you've been involved with the 10,000 Reasons Ministry and things like that. How do we brand ourselves as believers in a world that is saying, you know, it's all about you, you know, it's, you know, if it feels good, go do that, you know, and all that. So, you know, you're taking a brand and you're helping people understand that we live that out, but at the same time you're teaching them to become their own brand. So how effective do you see that in today's society? I know a lot of things have changed in the hiring world.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost is being willing to lead by example, showing your staff, whoever they are, that you're willing to get in there and do what they're doing, whether it's sweep the floor, mop the floor, pick up trash, help them take trash out. But I think the leadership by example is still real today. I think there's a lot of great people, Beth, at other restaurants, other fast food restaurants, but they're not being led well. And then that creates a culture where people don't want to work hard for their leader and for their fellow team member. And so I think you've got to create a culture of love and respect. We talk about respecting the guest, but you also got to, honor the person next to you. Because if we work together as a team, then we're going to portray that onto the guest. And so I think leadership, that starts with leadership. And if the leader's willing to be present and lead by example, then you're going to have even those teenagers want to work in those environments.
Yeah. Well, and being a mom, as you were saying, Beth, I think that is the best model is for us to lead by example for our children. And I'm so thankful that the Lord opened the door for Jason and I in the area of ministry and mission specifically to be able to model that to our children and to our family, which then ultimately led us to adopting our oldest son, but our two biological children being able to see Jason and I model putting others ahead of self through missions and through just the way we love on our employees and just constantly looking for ways to serve. As you mentioned, I was privileged to be a part of 10,000 Reasons for 8 years, and I was a part of the due diligence committee. We would vet Christian organizations to then provide grants for them. But it was the Whitfield students that brought those grants to 10,000 Reasons. And so to be able to just see and come alongside these students coming up in the next generation, wanting to put others ahead of self was a wonderful, it was great to be a part of such a wonderful organization.
I bet it was. So let's talk about the mission field, because you've been to Niger many times, and I know y'all have been together, but it kind of started where you both went on separate mission trips. So what happened with that, and how did that change your missionary mindset going forward as a couple and a family?
Yeah, you want to talk about how you grew up first? Yeah.
Yes, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church where we had a revival at least once a year. And missionaries would come to our church from all around the world, and they would share their story of serving in the area of the world in which the Lord had placed them. And I just always resonated with that deeply. And I would be moved to tears and just had a passion for really seeing and serving God's people through missions. But the church that I attended only sent teams out domestically, not internationally, and always had a passion for international. And so when God opened that door through another friend of Jason's through Chick-fil-A, Jason actually had the opportunity to go first, which I was a little bitter about, to be honest, Beth, at first, because I'd had this desire my whole life. And then Jason was the one that got invited first. But I think the Lord always knows best. And the Lord knew that if I would have gone first, I don't know that Jason would have been as willing to support that. But being that the Lord allowed him to have the opportunity to go first and to touch his heart in the way he did when Jason went that first mission, came back completely changed. Don't waste the water. Kids in Africa don't have any water. And then was like, Haley, you have to go, and I was like, you don't have to twist my arm. I would love to go. So, but I'll let Jason tell a little bit about how he got invited to go to Niger.
Yeah, I had an operator that I had become an acquaintance with. His name is Hal Rice, and he's out of Virginia. And he was raising money to build Christian classrooms in Niger. And Niger is a 94% Muslim country, but their freedom of religion is still open. They're still allow people to come in with different messages. And so to build Christian schools with a great education was kind of new to the area and a big need. The education wasn't real strong at the time. So I got to go and experience a fourth world country and see the poverty levels and the lack of water and the illnesses and the many things that we don't experience here. And it was just life-changing. And I committed to two things. One was to come back and raise money to actually build schools, not just classrooms. So we started an organization called Schools for Niger, Africa, where we ended up partnering with 17 different schools there, affecting 8,000 students over about a 14-year period. And then also I just had a real passion to get others there to see what I had seen. And so not just inviting Haley to go, I was just constantly recruiting people and trying to get them to go. So I began leading teams every January, and then Haley started leading women's teams every October. And you know, part of it was, it was a fourth world country, and there was some concerns and not really safety issues, but just concerns overall with going to that and illnesses and things. But also we had a young family. And so for us to team effort on the same ministry, but go at separate times, was still very strong for us to be able to support that ministry.
Yeah, our daughter Paulina was only 4 the first time that I went. So for Jason to be, have the responsibility of trying to run 2 businesses and also take care of our children, it was a big feat. So we had to get creative with that, and people rally around us to help support that effort. But yes, we definitely had to think outside of the box.
So how many times did you go?
So I went 19. Yeah, I went 19 over 14 years, and Haley went
17.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And I'm sure that changed your perspective in every way possible.
Yeah, exactly, in every way possible. And so much so that every time we would tell the story of the adoption or the things we were doing there, people would say, "You need to write a book. You need to write a book." And that that's eventually where we got to where we are today. But overall, just trying to get others to go experience what we did, or what we were seeing and what we were trying to accomplish. And I think a lot of people look at missions for sure as you're going to help that nation and the people of Niger. And while that was true, and we were raising money and exposing people to that to build schools, we also saw a lot of change in the team members we took. And whether they jumped in and got all on board for Niger, or they came back and did something different in their own small group, their own community, or their own church, it was very rewarding to see.
Well, so I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about getting out of the boat and a transition from the mission field. But I want to talk about that. We talked a little bit before about a lot of people are kind of talking about the title of your book, sitting on wait, because they want things to go back to normal in our world. It's like, okay, we had COVID, now everything's going to go back to normal. But what do you tell people that they're waiting on that? Because it may not go back to normal, and God's still calling us up and out. We're going to sink or we're going to sit, and we're not called to sink.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the questions or challenges people always kind of hesitate is they're waiting for a perfect time to do something or to go and serve. And there is no perfect time, right? There's always going to be some kind of an obstacle. And I believe that, anytime we're serving the Lord, it comes with sacrifice, right? So it's going to be hard. That's why we need the Lord to do what he's calling us to do. But yes, no perfect time. And I believe that the Lord has designed and created each one of us as believers with a specific calling, right? A calling to take the gospel and to use that in the sphere of influence, whatever your area of influence is. The Lord wants us to not be just consumers, but he wants us to be participants in his work here on earth. And so I think a lot of prayer. And then when we truly seek the Lord, we will find him, and he will guide and show us. And then we have to have the courage to then follow him, to step out of the boat as Peter did, and to walk on water and to trust him in that calling, whatever that calling looks like.
Well, and one of the things you talk about in the book is that people struggle with what that calling is. Do I have a calling? I mean, how do I know the calling? And that is a constant struggle for people. And, the book that I wrote first was Life on Purpose. It's about your purpose. People really wrestle with, is it this or that? Do I go here? Do I go there? How do you help simplify that for people? Because it's a big topic still.
No, you're exactly right. And I think the good news today is for Christians, we've already been called in Matthew 28:19. He has already called. The good news is you have been called. He's already said, go and spread the gospel. And then I think it's just trying to figure out where that works. But what we continually say throughout the book, and what we've been saying for years to people, is just keep saying yes, and find out where your passions are, and maybe surround yourself with community organizations or nonprofits or churches or missions that are speaking to you and speaking to your heart, and just say yes, and take a step forward and keep moving forward for God and see what he does. But we talk a lot about in the book about what the power of like one yes could mean. And so if you say yes, what could be the domino effect from that? And you could change many lives, including your own. And so I think too many people are waiting on what that exact calling is, but there's a lot going on out there. Get involved, look for passions, and just try to pour into that wherever you feel led.
And it's okay to try something and say, okay, not for me. Okay, not for me. And I like to call that, you got to know your knots. There's certain things I know I'm never going to do. And so when those opportunities come along, it's easy to say, not for me.
Right.
But if it is, then sometimes it does require that moment to step out of the boat, because that's going to look pretty darn scary. But, if Jesus is holding out that hand and saying, come, then we are to go. So
yes,
I think that's a big part of it. And so let's talk about the topic of purpose, because people think there's one thing, this is my purpose, but purpose is really more of a process. And Haley, why don't you answer this? Because as a mom and raising kids, purpose has seasons. Jason, you've been a businessman, you've been at work, and you've been doing a lot of things. But for women, this is a big deal because our purpose changes a lot. So what do you say to women, Haley, who really struggle with, what should I really be doing with my life?
Yes. Great question, Beth. I think, as I mentioned earlier, my dream was to be a stay-at-home mom. And after the Lord blessed me with 2 children, and I was doing a lot of laundry and changing diapers and feeding children, I remember thinking when my daughter was about 3 and my son was about 5, Lord, I love these children, but there has to be a little bit more to my life than just this day-to-day mom, routine. And I began praying that the Lord would give me an opportunity to serve in. And so I think that's the biggest thing, Beth, is I would encourage every mom, don't underestimate the power of prayer, right? Like even in our day-to-day routines, we need to be praying and saying, Lord, show me your will. What is your will for me right now? And then I believe that that God's plans for us, as you were saying, Beth, the seasons change, right? So for me, it was being a mom always, but then the Lord opened the door. I was a BSF leader for 8 years, and the Lord grew me in leadership there. And then after that, in that time, the Lord then allowed me to start leading teams to Niger, missions teams with women, to serve other women and children around the world and share the gospel with them. And so I believe as long as we are in tune with the Lord and truly seeking, he's going to put those people in front of us. But I think that's the biggest thing, is praying with open hands rather than, Lord, here's my agenda, right? Like that's how we know that it's the Lord's will, when it's not self-seeking and it's not something that we desire and then we're going after, but it's praying with open hand and hearts. And then the Lord just puts a person, calls you up out of nowhere and says, hey, would you like to participate in whatever that is? And then you're like, let me pray about that. And I just find when things come in my path that I am not seeking, those tend to be the roads that the Lord and the doors that the Lord is opening for me in my life, and the opportunities that he has given to me in the areas of serving.
Yeah. And I want to kind of touch on the topic of discipline, because you said several things there that are very important. You said seek the Lord, you said pray. But we got a lot of people in our lives, and we got mamas and spouses. And, when Jesus went off, he went off to seek his Father. And I think, I got 3 sisters. So I want to know what they all think, but I got to ask God first. And so how important is that element of discipline? And Jason, as a leader, I'm sure you have to teach that a lot, because we can't do it all, but we have to pick and choose. So how do you pick and choose and keep it according to the Lord's will?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, the Bible talks about disciplining our children and that it's okay in the stance of we need structure. And so for me personally, and one of the things we've taught our leaders is a lot of goal setting and written goals and trying to be able to then come back to those to keep you on track. This is the time of year, it's January, where a lot of people are doing their New Year's resolutions. And a lot of those fall by the wayside. I read the other day about this week, about the third or fourth week, people start
Right.
giving up. And so they may be written, but you've got to, what were those written for? What's the goal? Is that something that you've sought the Lord's direction on? And then what's the discipline behind that? There's a lot of books out there and things that talk about habitual, do something for 21 straight days and then it'll become a habit. And I think all of those work, but there's nothing better than starting the day in the Word with prayer, and then letting your day be guided by what God has in store for you. I think that's, if there's one discipline I can encourage people on, it's that one. And then there's a huge stat out there. I don't know what it is, but a praying couple stays together a lot more than those who don't. And so I think, but discipline needs to be there for us all, for sure.
Well, and that's what Jesus modeled for us, right, Beth, over and over in scripture. Before he started his day on earth, he went away to pray by himself. And so I think that's our greatest example, right? So if Jesus needed that while he was living here on the earth, my goodness, how much more do we? And so I also find that when I personally make Jesus my number one priority at the beginning of my day, the rest of my day goes smoother, and he stretches my time almost to give it back to me for spending and honoring him in that way. And my attitude, my character, everything is better because I've been reminded of who I am in Christ.
And it really does make that difference. I know if I've done the right things first, and I know if I've not, and you can tell.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
we all.
What do you recommend to people about international adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tell you that, the first thing I'll do is give a plug for Bethany Christian Services. They were outstanding for us and did a great job. And I think they help a lot of people with international. I will say that in reading our story, people will learn that we were called to adopt Rashid. And so we had our boy, we had our girl in life. We were done. I would tell you that I'm very buttoned up, black and white, disciplined, organized. And I thought we had the perfect little family. And God spoke to me over and over in dreams, if you will, at night and said, get Rashid out of there. He was a young man that we were sponsoring in Niger at the time. And it was a 3-year journey. We talk about that a lot in this one chapter of the book. And we even had some friends about 2 years in say, hey, because we had received our second no, and we had some friends say, hey, why don't you turn your attention to China or somewhere else? That there's tons of kids that need help. And Haley and I just didn't have that feeling of calling. We were called to adopt Rashid. And so we stayed focused on that. And the Lord showed up in big ways for us to do that. And he's now 25 and has graduated from college and living in Atlanta. And it's an amazing story. But so I wouldn't want to answer a lot for international versus domestic. We felt called specifically for a specific child, but adoption is a calling, and it is bringing a 14-year-old child into your home is got its benefits, and then its disadvantages as well from a standpoint of already having lived a lot of his life or part of it. And so it's not for everyone, but it's rewarding for both ends for sure.
Yeah. Haley?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to make sure that I said, was that adoption is truly a calling. From the organization that we used to go with to Niger, there are several families that have adopted from Rashid's orphanage. There's about 7 other kids that have come from that same orphanage. And it's hard. There are days in adoption where you are just frustrated and you're crying, and, it's hard for the child. It's hard for the parents. It's hard for any other biological children that may be impacted as well. And so going back to kind of what we were saying, Beth, is some people just think, oh, wow, adoption sounds cool. We'll look into that. And I would just really say, make sure you have that bathed in prayer before you commit to taking that on, because you truly do need to rely on the Lord and his strength throughout the entire adoption process.
And so he's 25.
Mm-hmm.
He's 25. He's been here 11 years. He came into our home when he was 14, and we started the process when he was 11, and we had been sponsoring him since he was about 7. So we've known him since he was about 6 or 7.
Wow. So you had a relationship with him. It's funny how often you hear that, is that people go and they meet one particular child and the Lord puts it on their heart. So that's a great story. I know you had your struggles, but I mean, that's really good. And just think of all those 7 kids that have been plucked out of there and put in home. So let's talk about your book, Sink or Sit. What's the difference?
Yeah. So Haley mentioned this earlier, but God, Jesus commanded Peter to walk on water. He said, "Come to me." And he turned out that as he got out there on the water, he did start losing a little bit of faith and started sinking. But we believe sinking is better than sitting, because he's the only disciple that got to walk on water. In fact, he's the only second person ever. The other person was the Son of God. And so he took a risk. He followed that command and went out there. And so every one of the chapters in the books talks about being called. And we just believe that's a command, and that's God's commanding us, or, whatever definition you want to put around that. And so with this, it's, hey, there's opportunities out there all around us to serve the Lord, to make a difference, to spread the gospel. We just need to say yes. We need to get up, not sit there. We need to get out of the boat and try to make a difference. There's a really cool song out there by Matt Redman that says, Matthew West, sorry, thank you. But it's "Do Something" is the name of the song, and he's really angry at God with the poverty and all that he sees around him that's negative, and he's yelling at God, and he says, "Do something, do something." And the song says, God looked back at him and said, "I already did. I created you." And so we've all been put here to make a difference, and our encouragement and that nudge is take a step, get out of the boat, say yes.
Well, and one of the things I used to tell our children and the Bible study ladies that I work with is, every day that we wake up is another day, a gift of life from the Lord. And so, as you were saying, Beth, we all have been created with a specific purpose to play our part in God's story, right? So the whole world is all about the Lord, and then we are just the participants in what he is doing in the world. And so our encouragement is every believer has a purpose, right? Like the Lord wants them to participate with him. And so what a joy and a privilege it is to be able to participate with the King of the universe and what he is doing. How humbling is that he would allow us. He doesn't need us, but he is allowing us the privilege of joining him in what he's doing. So why not? Why not? God writes the best stories. So my encouragement is hand him the pen and let him write your story and join him in that. It's the best way.
Well, and let's talk about, so when he stepped out on the water, even though he sank, Jesus still pulled him up. And so he will pull us up, even if we turn around and look back, but what do you say to someone who's really wrestling with this? They've got some decisions to make. They don't know what to do. I mean, I talked to someone this week, and she says, I'm paralyzed to make a decision.
Yeah.
And, what do you say to someone who's in that situation? Because they're scared.
Yeah. Haley and I became, as I mentioned earlier, recruiting machines trying to get people to go to Niger with us. And we're actually coming to you live today from Alaska. We started a nonprofit here. That's a whole nother story, but
I thought it was cold here in Louisiana.
Yeah. So it's about 9 degrees outside behind us. So, but what we learned is over and over, like you mentioned with your friend, we kind of hear these 3 F's as roadblocks that people had. And one was usually finances. Yep. I can't go. I don't have the money. Yep. Number 2 was, hey, I have a family. I can't get away from them. And the other one we would hear a lot of is what you're mentioning now is fear. And so we would counteract that with another F, which was faith. And you've got to have faith in the Lord to raise the money for you. There's a lot of people that want to invest in your story and send you because they can't go. Family, others will rally around you to figure that out. And then fear, you've got to throw that at the Lord's feet and just set that aside and step out and trust him and have faith in that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, Beth, anything that the Lord calls us to is going to make us fearful, right? Because God's not going to call us to small things that we can do in our own ability, right? And so it's going to be the crazy, scary, get out of the boat calling. That's where God steps up and takes our hand and proves that he's never going to leave us and he's never going to forsake us. Right. But yeah, as Jason was saying, that's where our faith piece has to come in. And we just truly have to believe all of the characteristics we know about God, the God that we believe in, that we serve. We have to take those from our head knowledge to our heart knowledge and truly trust in him. That he is going to, his plans are to prosper us and not to harm us, but to give us a hope in a future, even the big scary ones.
Yeah. And if there's not tension, then Satan's not paying attention. He's not worried about what you're doing.
Yeah. It reminds me of the Andy line. If you pay attention to the tension.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the tension has a purpose.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And if God doesn't call you, if it doesn't drive you to your knees, God didn't call you to it.
That's right.
Because you're going to need him. He's going to need you to depend on him. And that's a very big, important thing. So, and I just want to point out that, y'all have been to Niger all these times. You've adopted a child. You've had your own children. You've been involved in ministries. You have a big business plan. But you've still figured out a way to do what God's called you to do outside of those. So how important is it to give up the logic and turn it into faith? Because we're not going to understand most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Beth, you're exactly right. Like there is, to me, in God's economy and what he calls us to, it isn't very logical, right? Like it's, but I think that Jason and I, and most Americans, I would say, are busy, right? If you ask most Americans, they would say, life is great, but I'm just very busy.
Right.
And I think, honestly, Beth, that Satan's number one strategy is to keep us busy, because if we're so busy and the schedule's so full, we don't have time in there to do ministry work, right? And so kind of going back to what you were asking earlier, and we were talking about with discipline, is ministry, to whatever degree that is that God calls you to, should be our number one priority after our family, right? So it should be that piece of the pie that we are trying to make sure is a priority, because that's why we're here. And we also feel like when we're serving the Lord, Beth, there's no greater joy. It's almost like my cup overflows, that scripture that talks about that. That is the true joy, is when we serve the Lord in the areas in which he calls us to, then he fills our hearts with the joy of overflowing, because we have lived the model of others ahead of self and sharing the gospel with the world that doesn't know him.
Well, and one last question, because I just have to throw this out there. As your marriage, you've had the dynamics of your marriage and sharing purposeful things. Has that been important for you to share the mission and the vision together, even though you go separately, to have something you're so passionate about other than your family and your business, and it's, changing the world so far away?
Yeah. And I want to make sure we don't come across as it's the only way, but it's been a great way for us. And we're both passionate about it, whether it was Niger or now Alaska, and just being able to, whether it's the talks at dinner or the planning around the mission coming up and who we're inviting and the money we're raising and the supplies we're getting, but to be able to do that together and also serve through our church at Passion and be able to do things through that together. It's just been great for us, and keeps us even more connected, even if I have a long day at work or I'm away for the whole day. But to be able to come back to this ministry discussion and this something to look forward to as we plan our next team, or our next project that we're going to raise money for to help and make a difference. It's been powerful.
Absolutely. I think it's just another form of connection, Beth. When Jason had gone the first time to Niger and I had not been, as much as Jason would talk and share pictures and cast the vision, I couldn't quite grasp that until I actually went and saw it for myself, right? And so I think that would be true in any marriage. And my encouragement would be that, they would pray about what is a ministry, an area of ministry that we could do together. How can we serve the Lord together? And what does that look like? Because if you're not serving together, then that can be a little bit challenging too. The other spouse can be a bit resentful, if one is always serving and that one is not. So I would carefully consider being able to serve in some kind of ministry area together, whether that's your church, whether that's missions, whether it's no matter what that area is.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, congratulations on all of your accomplishments. And, there's nothing like a good old story that can change other people's lives, whether it be mission fields in Niger, Africa, in a Muslim nation, or adopting a precious boy at, starting the process at 11 to meld into the rest of your family. Those are just great things that inspire people that God's still working in the impossible. He's doing great things and miracles, and he's still in the miracle making business. So that's really, really great to be able to see lived out in your lives and in your family's life. So thank y'all for sharing your story. Thank you for writing your book. I don't want to sink. I'm gonna sit and keep going, and I know you'll inspire many to do that. So thank y'all so much for being here with me today, and for all that fun stuff going on in Atlanta. We loved living there, so I know you're having a big time.
Well, thank you, Beth. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Beth, so much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
God bless.
Bye-bye.